So welcome everyone to today's webinar, Recognizing World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. We are so happy that you are able to join us today for our esteemed experts and advocates who are going to be talking about the rights of older adults. This event couldn't be possible without the partnership with our agencies and organizations that we've been working with over the past year to get this event organized. And we thank all of our speakers for joining us as well. So I just want to acknowledge our partners with the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse and the BC Community Response Networks and CanAge for their work working with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario to host this great event that we're having today, and also for you as participants taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in this dialogue that we're having and hopefully engage in some great discussion as we move forward in our panel of experts with the questions that we have posed for them, and having some time at the end for you to ask your questions at the end of the day. I do want to introduce my colleague, Benedict Schifflin, with the Canadian Elder Abuse Network, who we've been working quite closely, and as I mentioned, organizing this event, who's just going to go over a few of the housekeeping items and to introduce herself. Benedict?
Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Benedict Schifflin. As Rayanne mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, known as CNPEA. I am extremely thrilled to see how many of you have found time today to come and attend this event. I know it's a busy time for all of us. So as you know, to do an event like today, it takes a lot of people and it takes a couple of basic rules to make the dream work. So I'm going to run us through this before we actually get the event underway. So first things first, as I mentioned to the early birds, all attendees' cameras and microphones are turned off automatically during the webinar in order to protect the integrity and the quality of the sound since we're recording. So feel free to move about and do whatever you want. We cannot hear you. When it comes to questions you might have, you will be able to ask them in writing later, and I will get to that in just a minute. For the French language interpretation, if you're wanting to listen into that so that you can hear people speak in French, accessing it is very easy. You have to click on the little globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. Click on that, select French, and you should be able to hear our wonderful interpreters today. For those of you who want to have visibility, to be able to see the ASL and LSQ interpreters for sign language, they should be visible on your screen at all times. Please let us know if you don't see them. We also want you to know that once we, stop sharing, while we're sharing something on screen, you have the ability to adjust the screen size. So you can slide, there's a vertical line, you can slide left to right to make either the screen or the speaker view bigger or smaller. For the speakers, sorry, you can also choose to see them either as a grid or as a speaker view, so a group view or an individual view. That is up to you. You can toggle back and forth. In terms of questions, as I mentioned before, we will be welcoming questions throughout the presentation. So if you have any questions you want asked to our speakers today, you can click on the little Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type your question in there. Just to be clear, today's event, our speakers are speaking in English. However, feel free to type your questions in French if you prefer. We are able to take your questions in French and we'll address them as well. You also have access to the chat box, and that is extremely useful if you want to engage with your fellow attendees, if you want to share resources. We're trying to encourage you to use the Q&A box for questions to the speakers and the chat box for everything else so that we can keep track more easily because there are many of you today. In terms of evaluation, at the very end, once you close the window and leave the event, you'll get a little pop-up window that invites you to take a very short survey. It's about 5 minutes, if not less, and it helps us figure out how we did and how we can do better next time. And then finally, it's a reminder that this event right now is being recorded. So we advise you, if you have any pressing questions about a personal issue, to not share any personal details in the chat box or the Q&A. Please send us an email separately and we'll follow up with you individually so that we can protect your privacy. I believe that is it for the advice and housekeeping. Ryan?
Thank you, Benedict, for going over that. Just wanted to thank our partners again for joining us and hosting this event. And we will begin introducing our moderators for today. So we have two moderators joining us, and we're so pleased, as one is our partner with CanAge, was Laura Tamlin-Watts, who is the CEO of CanAge. Many of you may have worked with Laura or have heard her on CBC or many radio or television stations advocating for older adults over the past many years. Her work focuses on law, aging, abuse, accessibility, law reform, governance, and knowledge mobilization. She was previously the Chief Public Policy Officer at the Canadian Association of Retired Persons and the National Director for the Canadian Centre for Elder Law. So welcome, Laura. And we are also joined by a colleague, Margaret Gillis, who is the founding president of the International Longevity Centre Canada, or better known as ILC. So Margaret is not only the founding president of that organization, but also the co-president of the International Longevity Centre Global Alliance, which has 16 centers across the world dedicated to the needs of older persons. And she has been involved in establishing age-friendly community programs in Canada and internationally, and has a career in working with joint NGO projects to protect seniors in disasters. I know she is the lead organizer in Canada, along with her colleague Kieran, advocating for the UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons in Canada, and has taken a leadership role in that, not only within Canada, but internationally. So thank you, Margaret, for your leadership, and for Laura for the work you do, and helping to also moderate today's session. And we're looking forward to your engagement in today's session. So I'll turn it over to Margaret.
Thank you very much. It is my honor to introduce you to Deborah Saywich, who will be bringing the Indigenous welcome. Deborah is the founder and consultant with Age Friendly Consulting, and she is a member of the Washington First Nation. Deborah has lived an experience of 30 plus years in management and business, and she has been inspired by many collaborative and innovative partnerships which she's been involved with. She has been volunteering for over 15 years and was the co-president with Prevention of Elder Abuse, York Region. She's very excited to share that she and a colleague have recently launched OAKS, Older Adults Knowledge Sharing. Like a mighty tree, OAKS is planting the seeds of empowerment, education, wisdom, and sharing. Deborah's vision is to be part of the change, building relationships with respect, trust, and commitment. She says it takes a community to support an individual. Deborah, it's my pleasure to hand it over to you.
Ani, thank you, Margaret. Ani, and greetings to each and every one of you, together as we come across this great land, Turtle Island. I'm a proud Anishinaabe from Wasauksing First Nation, formerly known as Perry Island First Nation, Wasaya Koshing, meaning a place that shines brightly in the reflection of the sacred light, and a member of the Robinson-Huron Treaty 1850, where I'm also joining you today from Wasauksing. June is also National Indigenous History Month. Let me share our 7 grandfather teachings to guide us as we bring everyone together in a good way. Living a good life in peace and harmony with all of creation. Wisdom, love, respect, bravery, honesty, humility, and truth. Let us use these teachings today as a stepping stone as we engage in a very meaningful event. Rights do not get old. World Elder Abuse Awareness Day 2023. Miigwech, and let's have a fantastic event.
Thank you, Deborah. We're now going to move forward with the land acknowledgement. For me and those of us in Ottawa, it is an acknowledgement of the people of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, on whose unceded and unsurrendered territory we have built our homes, lives, and communities, and whose presence here reaches back in time immemorial. I ask you, as participants from other regions, to reflect and consider the territory on which you are currently sitting. A deeper reflection is necessary because while land acknowledgements are delivered with respectful intent, they oversimplify complex tribal histories and fail to recognize the ongoing impacts of colonialism that tribal communities continue to live with to this day. In addition to land acknowledgement, I encourage all of you to support Indigenous communities by taking actions such as looking at returning land, protecting the environment, insisting that governments respect and uphold trust responsibilities, which include appropriate funding, elect officials who understand tribal governments and challenge and reject all stereotypes. And finally, insist that children and grandchildren in our school systems are taught accurate information about the histories, cultures, and contemporary lives of Indigenous peoples. Most importantly, commit to become personally informed to empower us all to speak up and do our part in bringing about meaningful change that affect the lives of Indigenous peoples. Thank you. Yeah, back over to Laura.
Thanks very much, Margaret. Thanks very much, Deborah, as well. It is important, and I think something that we all need to take into account, that it, of course, is Indigenous Month, as well as Seniors Month. And as we are traveling these paths together, that we have our learnings and share those learnings. We invite you in the chat to reflect on these issues if you would like, and perhaps also recognize the land that you are working, playing, and sharing in your own personal journey. It's my thrill and honor to introduce you to the landmark WEAAD event for 2023. It's an international event. It's a United Nations event recognized by the General Assembly for the purpose of raising awareness about the violation of the rights of older people, which is often a very underestimated issue. Now, I know that you all know this, and I would love if you would feel free to share in the chat some of the great work that you're doing in your communities. What many people don't necessarily realize, of course, is that WEAAD is founded by a Canadian, that Dr. Elizabeth Podniak, long a champion of seniors issues, a scholar and an advocate, created this day. And I remember years ago when she said, we're going to make this a global day. We're going to get recognition from our politicians, from the United Nations, and we're going to celebrate this day around the world. And many of us looked to her and said, you know, Elizabeth, that's a moonshot. And she said, but together we can do it. And so we are here today to recognize her leadership and the leadership of all of you in making that moonshot a reality. We all have a role to play in making our communities safer for older people. And one of the people who has got that leadership role, of course, at the federal level, is our Minister for Seniors, Kamal Kara. We're going to have an opportunity to hear from our minister, and she was sorry that she couldn't join us specifically. And I wasn't going to let her off the hook, except that she's actually in Parliament and voting on important issues today. So that is the only reason that we found acceptable for her not to be here in person. And she did send her regrets, but just a few introductory comments about her. She, of course, was elected as Member of Parliament for Brampton West in 2015. previously as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health. And what that means is she understands that seniors' issues have a health, a financial, and a global importance. One of the important pieces is that she's not just our minister, but she herself is an advocate. And she's a nurse who put down her pen and picked up her stethoscope during COVID-19. She went into a long-term care facility in her local area and was at the very front lines, not just politically, but actually medically during this particular issue. Minister Kara really is involved in helping both at the federal level and the front lines. And she was also a vaccinator. And so one of the pieces that, of course, is critically important for us to think about has been the role of vaccines and the role of making sure that older people have access to all health equity. Believing in diversity, she's motivated, of course, to bring that expertise to the fold and create a better present and future for all Canadians. And with that, I'm going to ask that we roll our greeting from the minister.
Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. I want to thank the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, CanAge, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, and the BC Association of Community Response Networks for inviting me to speak today. World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is an opportunity for Canada to join countries around the world to collectively speak out against elder abuse and take action to further protect seniors in our communities. We recognize that elder abuse and ageism are connected and therefore must be addressed together. And as a government, we have taken a number of steps to raise awareness about and prevent both ageism and elder abuse. In early April, I was honored to participate in the 13th session of the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, after Canada joins its core group in March 2023. There, we will continue to work to promote, advocate for, and protect the rights of older persons both in Canada and around the world. Canada is also working with our international partners to raise awareness about the UN Decade of Healthy Aging. At home and abroad, we're working to leverage global efforts that foster healthy aging and combat ageism. Here at home, our government continues to work with partners across all levels of the government and civil society to combat elder abuse. Older persons deserve to be respected, to live in dignity, and to age in good health. Our government has also been working to strengthen Canada's approach to elder abuse by finalizing a federal policy definition. To support the development of the policy definition, we've held nationwide consultations seeking feedback from experts, stakeholders, and Canadians on a definition. Once created, the definition will help raise awareness and inform government programs and policies aimed at reducing the prevalence of elder abuse in Canada. In addition, the government will also share this definition widely, including with provinces and territories. I'm also happy to report that our collaborative policy work with provinces and territories is also advancing. As part of its priorities for 2022 to 2025, the federal, provincial, and territorial Forum of Ministers responsible for seniors is analyzing the impact of the pandemic on abuse, with the objective of informing FBT programming and policies. We expect that the Forum's report on the topic to be published later this summer or early fall. Additionally, the Seniors FBT Forum has identified ageism and its social and economic impact as a priority. In August of last year, the Forum launched a nationwide consultations on ageism to learn more about the impacts of ageism on the Canadian population of seniors and older adults. and a What We Heard report is expected to be published later this summer or early fall. In addition, the forum is currently working on the development of policy options report that will propose strategies, approaches, and promising initiatives to address ageism of older adults in Canada. Another way we're strengthening our approach to combating elder abuse and ageism is through our New Horizons for Seniors program. This year alone, we were able to fund over 600 projects across Canada that focus on elder abuse awareness and prevention. This includes projects like a seminar series that I attended last week in my community of Brampton, organized by the Brampton Association of Seniors Club, where they've been putting together sessions on elder abuse prevention so that seniors in Brampton can better recognize and address ageism and instances of elder abuse. At the end of the day, my top priority as Minister of Seniors is ensuring that older Canadians, no matter where they live, have access to the supports that they need. After all, seniors have built this country. They are the backbone of our Canadian society, and after a lifetime of supporting us, it's our job to support them. I also want to turn to now some very exciting news. Every year on World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, CanAge presents the Dr. Elizabeth Podnick's Award for Elder Rights in Canada. I'm honored to present this year's award to an extremely hardworking individual in recognition of their significant work within the aging field, as well as their contributions towards elder abuse awareness and prevention. Their work focuses on law and policy issues linked to aging and human rights, where they consult with communities, write legal reports, develop public legal education resources, and much more. Within their career, they've also written on a variety of important topics, including elder abuse. In recognition of her 15+ years of work in the field of elder law and research into matters that affect older adults relating to elder abuse prevention capacity, decision-making in healthcare, and specifically working with older women and people living with dementia on groundbreaking projects while at Canadian Centre for Elder Law. It brings me great pleasure to present this year's Dr. Elizabeth Podnick's Award for Elder Rights in Canada to the past National Director of the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, Krista James. Krista brings exactly what is needed right now. She encourages innovative approaches to aging policy through recognizing the citizenship rights of older people while also rejecting systemic ageism. We're so thankful for all of Krista's contributions while at the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, and I couldn't be happier to present you this award. Congratulations, Krista. Thank you. Merci.
I actually got a little teary there. Thank you, Minister. It's a wonderful
Hello, everyone.
opportunity
Bonjour.
to make sure that we're able to recognize the leaders in our field for too long, people who have worked either at the front lines in terms of community engagement, or whether it be at the policy level, were often overlooked. Dr. Elizabeth Podniak, as the founder of WEAAD and as a tireless advocate for elder rights in Canada, was the very first awardee. Last year, it was given to Sherry Baker, the longtime executive director of the BC Community Response Networks and longtime advocate with more hats than I can possibly mention. This year, as we've talked about, our recipient is Krista James, and I just wanted to take a small moment to speak of her work. Advocate, lawyer, mentor, leader, scholar, inspiration, and friend. Krista has led the field in elder rights in Canada, but she is a modest and a humble person. And she has always worked to lift up communities and marginalized voices and bring forward those who don't necessarily have the same ability to speak to media or to speak to politicians, to bring forward their stories. Her role has always been to put those before herself. Rarely does she draw attention to herself and her achievements. But Krista, this is the moment where we honor you, where we see you. Your writing and reports through the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, of course, are second to none. And that's the public face of your work. But not everyone will see the hours of mentorship, the tireless work with members of communities who are equity seeking, and the fights that you have fought to ensure that older adults have a voice, but not just a voice, that they've got actual pathways to their well-being, that they have rights, but not just rights that live on paper, but rights that can be understood by people and exercised by those who own those rights. You are an inspiration to us all. And today we honor you, we honor your integrity, and we honor your passion. It's my great privilege and honor to award you the 2023 Elizabeth Podniak Award for Elder Rights in Canada. Over to you.
I guess I need to unmute myself. I'm so humbled. This is so lovely. And it's been a real heart's journey working with the Canadian Centre for Elder Law. And just to tell you all a little secret, I actually didn't start out as an elder law advocate until I met a number of fabulous people, including Laura Tamblin-Watts, who's always inspired my work. But I came to the Canadian Centre for Elder Law from a background in human rights and poverty law and social justice. And I discovered within elder law that there's just so much work to be done, but also so many amazing people to work with. And that was one of the most exciting things I found in elder law was community, and community, not just with fabulous people who are doing this work, the advocates, the academics, but also working with older people and people living with dementia has just been a highlight of my life, and also my life in community. Everybody, people who know me well know me that I spend my weekends gardening with older women in the neighborhood. And I live in a building where there's so many different older women who are my community as well. And so this sort of way of living intergenerationally with older women, older people is just, I want everyone to have that experience. That said, it was a bit sad to leave the Canadian Centre for Elder Law onto a different journey, but I hope that my work at Vancouver Coastal Health will allow me to sort of leverage change from within the system. And I hope we will all stay connected. You know, I'm still with the Canadian Bar Association Elder Law section, and we have some work there on elder abuse that we're chipping away at behind the scenes. So I'm really excited to continue to do work in the elder law space, wearing this different hat. And I hope you'll all stay connected with me through social media. And thank you so much to all the people I've been able to work with at the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse and CanAge. There's just that we can't do anything alone. Everything that I've been able to do at the Canadian Centre for Elder Law has been possible because of collaboration and connection and relationships. It's just working with people with a shared mission that allows us to affect change. And that's a journey I hope to keep on with all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Krista. And again, we honor you and the work that you do. And I know that you do more before 9 a.m. than most people do on a whole day, and that every part of you is committed with your integrity, your passion, and your leadership. Thank you so much for joining today. At this point, it's my great pleasure to turn it over to my co-host, Margaret Gillis, who has an opportunity to briefly introduce our panelists who have the most astonishing bios, I have to say, but she's going to highlight a few of our pieces and we're going to get into our discussion today. Again, do feel free to use the chat function to share information, share resources, and just respond along the way. Over to you, Margaret.
Thanks so much, Laura, and congratulations to Krista for your well-deserved award. Now, to our incredible lineup of speakers. Today, we are hosting a national conversation with a panel of experts to address ageism, its impacts on the rights of older persons in areas as vast as employment, healthcare, social inclusion, safety and security, media, and its connection to elder abuse. Our panelists, who are each engaged in promoting the rights of older persons in their own way, will share their expertise and their passion, as well as initiatives and approaches to build better and more inclusive communities. So I'm going to begin with our first speaker, Dr. Amanda Grenier. Professor Grenier works at the Norman and Honey Schnipper Chair in Gerontology and Social Work at the Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. Dr. Grenier is an interdisciplinary scholar focused on aging and the life course. Her research focuses on understanding the interface of public policies, occasional practices, and older persons' lived experiences. Our next speaker is Mr. Ovid Mekredi. He is the ILC ambassador, and he is the former national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. Ovid became a national and international leader in advocating for Indigenous people's rights. From 1991 to 1997, he was the national chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He has now joined ILC Canada as our ambassador to continue his lifelong work to ensure equity and justice for Indigenous people and for older persons. Our next speaker is His Excellency Bob Rae, who is the ambassador and permanent representative of Canada to the United Nations in New York. Mr. Rae also served as Premier of Ontario from 1990 to 1995, and interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada from 2011 to 2013. In March 2020, he was named by the Prime Minister Trudeau, to be Canada's special envoy on humanitarian and refugee issues. He has been a really great friend to all of us who are working in the international level to better the lives of older persons. And we are fortunate to have his strong voice advocating for human rights at the United Nations. Our next speaker is Dr. Tazim Virani, who is the Senior Vice President, Social Impacts and Global Initiatives at SE Health. Dr. Virani is a seasoned healthcare professional with over 4 decades of experience in health and social development sectors. And as the Senior Vice President, Social Impact and Global Initiatives at SE Health, she leads an exciting initiative called Future of Aging that empowers older adults to live with dignity, choice, and independence. She is also a strong partner at the Canadian Coalition Against Ageism. Our next speaker is Dr. Tom Warner. Tom is the chair of the Seniors Pride Network. Seniors Pride Network, Toronto, asserts and advocates for the rights of 2 LGBTQI older persons. It engages in education and advocates for the rights of 2 LGBTQI and older persons. They have done a lot of great work, and he continues to be involved in assuring that there is respect and supportive and safe and healthy communities. And he has been an activist for over 50 years. And finally, last but not least, we have Ms. Moira Walsh, who is a Toronto Star journalist. Moira is the Star's lead on its Third Act project, which challenges governments, policymakers, and institutions to improve the way we live in later life. Moira has written extensively on issues related to older adults, along with social justice, health, and the environment. So thank you to all of those folks. We will be hearing from them in just a moment. I want to take just a second to make a few comments before we hand the stage over to Laura and our panelists. Now, today's discussion convenes citizens, advocates, professionals, and leaders who are taking an active role in tackling ageism and elder abuse. Their perspectives will provide inspiration and pathways to challenge the narrative around aging in Canada. Now, we all know that to live free from violence, abuse, and neglect is a basic human right. Yet older Canadians and many older persons around the world remain unprotected under international and domestic law, despite evidence that more protection is needed. As we will hear today, when the multiplier effect of ageism is coupled with racism, sexism, and homophobia, the risk of abuse significantly increases with no concerted efforts to connect intersectionality in laws, policies, and programming. There is, of course, hope. And I want to take a moment to tell you about some of the exciting changes taking place both at the international level and here at home. In April, we had the largest number of Canadian civil society organizations attend the United Nations annual meeting called the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, where we are determined to get a United Nations Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. The Open-Ended Working Group on Aging was a great success this year with a number of firsts. The first time a minister from Canada was in attendance, with thanks to the Honorable Kamal Khera. The first time Canada hosted a reception at Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. And we thank Ambassador Ray and Minister Khera for making that happen. We also had, for the first time, after 13 years of meetings, a decision document come out of Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, in which Canadian diplomats played a key role. There are now 2 co-facilitators, ambassadors from Brazil and Portugal, working intercessionally to come up with an agreed upon option on the identification of gaps in the current human rights framework. There is also a movement afoot in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, with work underway on a resolution on the human rights of older persons. Last year in Geneva, we had a multi-stakeholder meeting, and the resulting report called for the codification of older persons' rights in a convention. We all need to continue to work with our government to keep the momentum going. Here in Canada, we have launched the newly established Canadian Coalition Against Ageism, which is comprised of large national civil society organizations on aging with access to approximately 9 million older Canadians. This was a brainchild and is being led by Dr. Kieran Ribeiro, who's with us today, who is the chair of the board at ILC Canada. The Canadian Coalition Against Ageism is a comprehensive Canada-wide program to combat ageism against older persons while strengthening their human rights. It has a national agenda for social change, which is directly linked to human rights and our work at the United Nations. It also has a multi-year agenda, which will result in sustainable and scalable adjustments in the policies, practices, social norms, and mindsets that underlie ageism and restrict older persons from attaining their human rights. We intend to grow this coalition and use our collective power for meaningful and inclusive change. And I'm now handing it over to Laura for the Q&A period.
Thanks very much, everyone. And you can see in our chat that we are actually going to be asking 3 sort of big questions, or as I like to call it, what, so what, and now what? We're going to be exploring what the current state of affairs is. Where are we now on the rights of older adults? I'm going to ask them broadly what needs to happen, and then what can we do to really make the future better and to take action. But first, I think it's really important that we start off with the voice of some older people. And so these are some of the messages that we shared to you with permission from our CanAge and personal accounts. My son moved in with me during COVID-19. It seemed heaven sent at the start of 2020. But then he started taking my money and keeping my friends away from me. At first, it seemed like he was doing this to keep me safe. Now I'm scared. Now I'm afraid of him. I was lonely and went on a platform to make connections. Everyone said I should. I'm not that old. I still have lots of love left in me. But when I went on, I got caught up in what they call a romance scam. He didn't just take my money. He broke my heart. I spent 2 years locked in my room in a long-term care home, a place where I need to be because I have physical disabilities. I'm really old. I need that help. But my life wasn't worth living. I missed everything. And now I'm afraid it's going to happen again. What can you do to help? These voices give us a little bit of a glimpse of how important World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is and frames it in our thinking. And I thank those brave people who reached out to us to share their stories. But I'm going to start out a little bit on the personal. I'm going to go through each people. I'm going to ask you a two-part question. You're all here. You're all leading voices on ageism or elder abuse, rights, human rights, rights of older people, and you all come at this from different angles. So I'm going to ask you two parts of this question. How does elder abuse or aging inform and intersect with what you are doing in your work and in your life? And then how did you personally get involved and interested in these topics? Ambassador, I'm going to ask you to take the floor first. Over to you.
Wow. Well, it's great to be with you. It's wonderful to have a chance to chat. And thank you so much for including me in the conversation. I would say that the first thing that influenced me over many years from my childhood until I was in my 40s was the fact that I had a very warm relationship with my two grandmothers. One of whom lived to be 99, close to 100, and one who lived to be 107. So they both were with me not only through my childhood and my adolescence and my university years and my early time in politics, but right up until well into my 40s. So they were amazing women. I've been very much influenced by them still. I still think of them a lot, think of their example and their courage and their determination and what they stood for in life and how they aged. And I think about that a lot. Of course, I'm influenced by my parents. My dad had a very difficult time in his older years. He had some strokes that originally were not diagnosed. It affected his attitude, his emotions. He forgot how to play the piano. He was very depressed, and somebody who had been very vital and engaged and funny became very frail and very anxious and very depressed. So it was tough on my mom. It was tough on all of us. He stayed at home until he died, but it was a very challenging period of time for him in his senior years. My mom lived to be close to 100, and she was vital and engaged right up until just a few days before she passed away. So she was another example for me that has been very important. So I've had the benefit of having a lot of older people in my life over much of my life. And now, of course, I'm not a kid anymore. I'm 74. So the question of aging becomes quite real to me. I'm still working and still very engaged in my work and quite determined to keep on doing that as long as I feel I can be useful. But I'm very much aware of the fact that how I contribute and what I contribute is affected by my experience, affected by my perspective, and the fact that this is not my first rodeo, that you go through things once or twice or three times, and it affects you, of course. So I hope that brings me a little bit of knowledge, I think it's an exaggeration. You have to call it wisdom, but I think it is helpful to have some of these abilities to reflect a lot on life and on the meaning of our lives and how we can make the best of the time that we have on this earth. My current role, thanks to Margaret, I'm playing a stronger role on what's happening with older people around the world. Politically, I was very much involved in looking at nursing homes when one of my first speeches in the legislature of Ontario was about caring for people as they get older, and the problem of warehousing and the problems of privatization, and how that has created a culture there that is not healthy for how we treat older people. I visited a lot of people in nursing homes and had a lot of experience with how the healthcare system treats older people. And I'm convinced that a lot of people who we assume are not responsive, it's because we're not engaging with them. We're not asking people to respond. And the more quickly people get marginalized, the more quickly they behave that way and then internalize that behavior, and then it becomes very difficult for people to fully participate. The one really positive thing I believe very, very strongly is that baby boomers will not go away and will not leave the scene quietly. And I do think that's a cause for hope, frankly, in a number of developed countries where you can see the population connections are different, and where as the older population grows, it becomes more demanding. I always tell people that, when my generation was growing up, schools started to change. And when we became teenagers, the teenage culture suddenly developed and changed very radically. When we went to university, political activism started in university. And so it goes on. And I believe that the people who were badass activists when they're in their 20s are going to be badass activists in their 70s. I think we're seeing that.
And you are. You so much. I think that's actually the quote that I'm going to take away from now about activists in their 70s. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that. Amanda, I'm going to ask you later. So Amanda and I have worked together with many academic areas, and you really work a lot for people who have marginalized voices, people who have lived in precarious situations. How did you get into this field? And tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Happy to speak with you about my work. I'm a social gerontologist. And I mean, without going into the long story of, I suppose, how I got there, it is influential women in this case who were social justice, concerned with social justice and equality and human rights. And that was kind of my early upbringing in grade school and high school. And as I went through university studies and then was taking social courses of social work, sociology, etc., I started realizing that one of the under-recognized groups was really older women, and also in terms of poverty and the marginalized voices were not talked about. So they were talked about maybe until retirement, but then not afterwards. And then we talked about older people, but we didn't talk about the intersections of being excluded or marginalized older people. And so that's something I've taken up throughout my career and continued to work there. So as Laura says, precarity, looking at who gets excluded from which kinds of domains, which voices are unheard, how do we go about including older people, and are the opportunities or the responses and the opportunities that are afforded older people or not, are they creating disadvantage and hardship? Or are they actually opening up possibilities for the realization of rights, well-being, and so forth? And so I think I will comment a little bit on the elder abuse piece, on how that fits with where I came from. Is I think sometimes we think about elder abuse as an individual issue. And what I want to really push is to talk about how, yes, it happened. We see it as happening to particular people in families and situations, but I want to argue for that it's not happening in a void, and that it's not just coming from nowhere, but it's about these relationships, the power dynamics, and where we're devaluing older people. So that's really what I want to bring in today, is that discussion of inequality, disadvantage, and thinking about elder abuse and rights from a perspective of of exclusion, marginalization, disadvantage.
Thanks so much, Amanda. One of the things that we always talk about is how we don't have enough data and we don't have enough research. And so it's critically important that you keep doing the work that you're doing, because we do need those gaps filled in, particularly around more marginalized older communities. Moira, you and I have known each other for a long time, and you did that almost impossible thing. You wrote an uplifting book about aging, and particularly aging and care and health. How did you get into this particular area, and how did your journey start? Oh, I think you just need to click, sweetheart.
I knew I was going to forget that. Thank you, Laura. I started in about 2002 as an investigative reporter at the Toronto Star. And as an investigative reporter, you have to be very entrepreneurial about ideas. So I decided to look at demographics, and knowing that the population was aging, then we decided to look at housing. So we did a year-long investigation that was published at the end of 2003. And it had a pretty good impact on paper, but in reality, not so much changed in terms of long-term care. And so over the years, I continued to cover it, but I started to sort of realize that nothing that I was doing in terms of looking at these very negative stories was really making a difference. And that's when, through conversations and debates with my editor at the time, we decided that I would look for something that was completely different and try to find an approach that upturned the old institutional style of care. And we found that story in a nursing home in Malton, operated by the Region of Peel. And it transformed its home with a different style of care. In this case, the model was called the butterfly model, but it was very much focused on the individual rights of residents in the home, and a recognition that those rights prevailed over the needs of the home and the schedules of the home. And so that's where it all began. And then I think now with the STARS Third Act project, we're taking that further. And I would say right now, our focus, my focus, seems to be continuing on housing and the rights of people to live within the community, within long-term care, with respect. But also, I think the whole entire issue is sort of bound by possibility thinking. There's a lot of really interesting, exciting approaches that I want to get to in my coverage through the Third Act.
I love possibility thinking. I've put that down there. I've got badass seniors, in the 70s doing things. I got possibilities thinking. These are great takeaways as well. I wonder if I could turn it now to Tazim. You've been working in the field a long time, and you make that connection between the individual person who needs help right up through the systems as well. How did you get into it, and what are the issues that you're really seeing on the ground today?
Well, I guess, first of all, I have to say it is pretty depressing after being in healthcare for over 40 years and as a registered nurse in various capacities, that we continue to not only see elder abuse in all its forms, but it's not going away in any major way. And so I have to say it's quite depressing from that perspective. I also want to give shout out to Margaret Gillis. I attended one of her sessions about just before the pandemic, so maybe about 4 years ago. And I was so inspired. I went back to my organization, St. Elizabeth Healthcare, and I said, we got to do something about this. We got to be part of the solution. We just can't, do our little things. We need to be part of a collective action. So in my current capacity at St. Elizabeth Healthcare, which primarily provides services to older adults, this is a really important issue we've taken. And I lead a program called The Future of Aging. So one of our streams of work is very much about ensuring the rights of older persons, that they're protected, and that we stamp out ageism. And, you know, there's so much written and there's research that shows that actually ageism negatively affects older persons' mental and physical well-being, you know, through things like limiting access to healthcare, compromising or misdiagnosing and not providing the kinds of treatments that they need. So it's happening in all spheres. And sometimes people don't even realize that these things are actually based on ageist attitudes, and these are so rooted that we kind of underestimate them. So we're really focused on trying to create at a broadest level age inclusive society. And so that's where, you know, internationally it was so important that my organization became an accredited member of the open-ended working group on aging, that you know, we were supporting, and we were present at in April at the UN to support all the collective action that's happening, that we are then participating and becoming a founding member of the Canadian Coalition Against Ageism, which Margaret mentioned. And at the local level, taking, you know, specific actions, you know, raising awareness. We've been part of the global rally, et cetera, but also within our own organization. So a couple of things that I'll speak later more about is, you know, right to age-friendly and affordable housing, age-inclusive workplaces, and intergenerational engagement. So these are the things that are really kind of my passion right now, and happy to talk more about it.
Thanks very much. Tom, happy Pride. We're so delighted that you get a chance to celebrate both Pride and, of course, WEAAD Day together. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this area, what your journey is, and what do you see that's really pressing on your plate right now?
Thank you. As was mentioned, I've been an activist in the LGBTQI plus community for over 50 years. And so my journey has been one as first as a young queer person, and now as an older queer person, and through the different stages of life, having to advocate for basic human rights and equal treatment for 2S LGBTQI plus people. When I was younger, in the 70s, Mr. Ray, I think I was one of those badass activists in the 1970s, and we may have crossed paths a couple of times along my journey there. But in the 1970s, it was basically advocating for amendment of human rights codes to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. Later in the 1990s, I was involved with, again, advocating for changes to laws to recognize same-sex spousal relationships. And within that, I mean, there were all the issues around partners and spouses of gay and lesbian people not being recognized by healthcare providers in terms of being able to make medical decisions for their partners or for visitation and that kind of thing. Also, during that terrible period in the 1980s and 1990s with HIV and AIDS and all of the people in our community and other communities who were really very badly treated, mistreated, not treated within the medical and health and social service communities. So I had an awareness there of some of the issues and concerns and obstacles that we as a community face. Also, now that I'm 70 years old and I've been retired for 6 years, I was looking for something else that I could maybe stir things up a little bit around. So I got involved with the the Senior Pride network in Toronto, and through that I've learned a lot more about some of the specific issues and concerns of members of our communities when it comes to health and home care services, retirement homes, long-term care homes. Will they feel safe? Will they do they have a fear of being mistreated or abused, not being provided with the appropriate kinds of services? There's a lack of awareness on the part of healthcare providers about the particular health needs and concerns of 2S LGBTQI plus seniors. Right. And also just on a personal level, my mother had dementia. And was in a long-term care home for the last 3 or so years of her life. And so I have an awareness of some of the the issues and challenges around people who are living with dementia, and so that's helped to inform some of my advocacy as well.
Thanks so much, Tom. So what we see again is that personal connection and also the role of social justice across that life course. One of the leaders in Canada of social justice across the life course is, of course, a name familiar to all of us, Ovid Mercredi. And Mr. Mercredi, I wonder if you could share with us just a little bit what you see are key issues in elder abuse in the communities that you have represented, and what is it that you hope to bring to the conversation today? Oh, and the challenge, of course, is always the mute button. So thank you very much, Mr. Mercredi. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll answer the questions that were on the screen too. I think people need to understand that there's a big difference between the freedoms and the rights of Indigenous people, like First Nations people in Canada, and those shared by all other people, like you Canadians on the screen right now. So we deal with social problems or issues concerning our people regardless of their age, whether young adults or young children or older people. We have to see the world in a different way. And so we look at what the country is doing or is not doing, and that's not a very good story. So a lot of our struggle is about getting Canada to recognize our rights as a people, and even the rights that they promised to provide to nations, rights that were made under treaty and so on. Well, for the matter, more recently in 1982, when the Supreme Court was changed, the Supreme Law was changed, the Constitution that recognized treaty Aboriginal rights. Those rights are not treated as a full box of rights by the politicians or by the courts. So part of what we do when we deal with specific issues like elders' needs or problems or abuse, we have to engage our minds as to our relationship with the country and what they are doing in relation to the specific needs of Indigenous elders across the country. Now, the other thing for us is that we have our own governments, so we're not totally focused on the province or the federal government like most of you would be. We also have to, as leaders and members, pay attention to the capacity and the ability of our own governments to provide services to their own people. But that's all caught in the same trap, the trap of colonization and the impact of colonialism, even when it comes to something as providing services to elders. So our perspective, I think, is somewhat different. But what's interesting to me here is the convergence that I see. Like I might be actually joining Canadians fighting for the rights of older people. I mean, I never thought I'd see that. Because normally we appeal to Canadians to join forces with us. We ask for allies, we try to build relationships. And we seldom succeed in getting any continuity and persistence in support for our rights and freedoms, but also in support for accessing needed services. But I wanted to also let you know that when it comes to older people or elders in our communities, and don't forget I'm 77 years old, so I saw this when I was a child. We don't see them as a problem or a burden. They're very much part of the community. They're totally integrated into the community. And they're part of our wisdom keepers. There are knowledge keepers that teach young people morality and ethics and so on. But they're also skilled individuals that can teach young people skills that they need to survive in their respective communities and so on. And elders occupy, in many cases across the country, very integral roles when it comes to ceremony, or even in terms of hereditary leadership in some communities. So our elders are valued in that sense. Unfortunately, what's happened over the years, though, with First Nations people, and I'll only speak about First Nations people, is the impact that Canada had on our daily lives, meaning it's not all been very positive. So, for instance, the legacy of residential schools is very prevalent now, and that has created social problems beyond measure. It has broken the family ties, and bond that used to be there in high numbers, or greater bonding that used to be there. And the result has been that in some cases, the older people in our communities, they become parents again of their grandchildren. And that's attributed to a breakdown of our family structure. And that is a finger pointing directly at the churches in the country about their role in residential schools. And the other thing that I want to mention about when it comes to elder services and all that, as much as possible, the state should be interested in working with First Nations in providing services closer to home, if not directly at the community level. Suppose many of you are aware that we have no hospitals in our communities. We have no paramedic services. And whatever we have in terms of healthcare is something that we have to fight for every year, this is through contribution agreements with public servants and so on. And in many instances, the provinces are not even engaged with our people in terms of providing services. So we're not like the rest of the country. So for many of you, when you deal with issues of dementia or medical issues that your people have, at least you live in the cities, or at least if you live in a white village or town, you're accessible to a hospital. We don't have that privilege in First Nations countries across the country. So in many instances, transportation, medical transportation is our hospital, and at least that's what takes us to the medical and hospitals in the country. So elders, as we get older, and I'm going to be one of them pretty soon, we don't have long-term care services in abundance. There's a few of them. In my own community, municipality, Queen Nation, Grand Rapids, we have no long-term care. Not that because we're neglecting our elders, it's just that we don't have resources to build long-term care facilities.
Yes.
And I think that's the kind of perspective that I can offer to this movement for a charter on the rights of older persons, is to make sure that provisions in that kind of an instrument, the rights and freedoms and opportunities for Indigenous people across the world.
Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you. That's just so critically important that we realize that many of the assumptions that are made in white communities, in urban communities, in communities of people that have transportation and resources are very different. And actually getting that word out is something I want to draw upon. Moira, you and I have talked many times about how is it that people can capture media. And I know that on our webinar today, we have many people who would like to get media more interested and more involved. You have been at the forefront for this. Can you very briefly give a little bit of a recipe for what a journalist needs? What is it that a journalist needs? You say, I'm interested in a story. I'm interested in what's going on. You know, I need these 3 things. Tell us a little bit about what you need as a journalist or what other journalists need to share the messages around seniors issues or elder abuse.
Sorry about that. Taking into account the new reality that newsrooms are shrinking dramatically, there's a real sense that we have to focus on certain stories. And so what's really helpful to us is if somebody sends me an email and it's sort of written in a chapter-like form that does not have focus to it or a specific point to it, they're probably I'm probably going to respond, but I don't know that that will result in a story. So I have people who send me emails. There's a retired journalist who's now living in Montreal, and she sends me a couple of lines that are very specific and pointed. And then I think, that's a great story idea. So, you know, I put that down on a list of stories that I need to get to, and I live in constant guilt that I don't get to all of these stories quickly enough. But I think just being very specific, and if you know of here's the issue, maybe here's a policy change if you're aware of that, but just be very detailed and blunt about what your concern is. And then if we see that, we can, if I can't do it, perhaps I can pass it to my editor who can send it around.
And to have someone to interview, that's something that we hear all the time. So for community-based organizations, if you can create a speakers bureau, because this idea in the amorphous is something I know that journalists are really struggling with. So it's helpful for you, right? If there's someone that they can talk to.
100%, because sometimes people will, you know, give you this great story idea, but then they say, I don't want to talk. I don't want to put my name to it. And so we can't really do anonymous stories in that respect. So it really makes a difference to be prepared and ready to go on the record.
That's so helpful. Amanda, I'm going to come to you around some of those gaps, if it's possible, and ask you a giant impossible question, but just pick one little piece of it. I understand. You know, we know that data gaps in this area of elder abuse and elder rights are profound. You know, can you speak a little bit about some of those barriers or some of those gaps that we need to know more about?
Yeah, okay. So just picking up a couple of pieces, that's a great question. Like, what do we need to know? I think I would focus on the how in some way. And so this might be slightly different from Moira's perspective of having the soundbite. In some way, like as someone who documents and works with older people's stories and life accounts, sometimes it's that complexity that we really need to kind of keep hearing to figure out, well, how is the experience, what are the similarities that might exist, for example, among older people's needs? So those might be income, security, housing, and care. But then, you know, as Ovid Mercredi was just saying, like, we also have to know what are the particular intersectional differences about how histories are going to impact people's lives, and how a location like poverty is going to change how, and I mean social location there, but also geographic locations, how gender, so how those kind of intersectional layers are going to affect that story. And so I think sometimes that's the tension with academics, is we're trying to understand these stories, but also concepts like human rights. So once we have the stories, how do we then link that with frameworks that might be human rights, for example, might be social justice, maybe thinking about inclusion. So trying to cobble those together in some way. So getting the data from older people themselves at diverse social locations, understanding the structures that exist in society that may open access or create exclusion, and then using that as a basis for action.
Really helpful. Tazim, I'm going to come to you, and I am pulling upon a number of the questions that we're getting right now in the chats. Again, please put them in the Q&A and I will meld them into my questions today. One of the questions that we got is, working in this frame, hearing your comment that things are getting worse. And by the way, that's exactly what we see too. Actually, the numbers are getting far worse than they ever were. And there are more people being affected by this just by sheer numbers. So both of those things happening at the same time. The question is, what is a particular area that you see getting worse? And do you have, if you had a magic wand at a practical level, what is something that you would do to remove that barrier or try to make that problem get a bit better?
Oh, wow. So good question. And certainly many things can happen, but I'll touch on a couple. So the first thing is, I'm going to pick up the thread, being a badass activist that's aging. I want nothing about me without me, nothing about us without us. So I think including older adults in every decision that affects their lives, whether at the individual level or at the collective level, is significantly important. And everybody needs to get that in their heads, in their policies, in their actions, that don't make policies without engaging with older adults of many varieties. We're not one homogeneous group. So we need good consultation, good involvement, good engagement. So I think that's a practical and doable thing that can happen. At my area of work, there are two areas I'm really deeply involved with. One is in terms of housing, like designing age-friendly and affordable housing that people can move into and stay there and age in place. That is not always happening. So, we tend to love to segregate people. And when I talk about housing, I don't talk about housing just for older persons, but housing where older persons are part of communities. And so I think, again, there needs to be policies and, developers and us.
Funding, actually. Yes, exactly.
And funding to influence how we live together. And there's such beautiful models around the world where this is happening, but it's in pockets. And as the world is, aging, like this, we're not the only ones in Canada that are aging, all over the world. Yeah. We need better models. And frankly, I would like to stop building nursing homes. I would actually like to build homes where people are part of communities. And so, that's one particular area. And I think that's a practical area, difficult area, but practical area. We're actually taking that one on and designing that with older adults. And then the other one is, I think, and there's so many interventions that can happen here, but I touched on it earlier in terms of intergenerational engagement. And I don't mean just from, but also recreation and fun things. Like we should be engaging together and learning from each other. And I'm finding like younger people often don't have even access to older people in their lives. And I'm like, why is that? Like, how did we generate our society that we're all doing things in segregated ways? So we have a current innovation challenge. And I was so pleased that two of the projects are actually pitching ideas next Thursday around intergenerational engagement. Like one is workshops on painting murals, for God's sake, like beautiful idea, like an arts idea, but intergenerationally. And I think they'll learn so much together. So those are just some practical things that I'd like to put together.
Really uplifting. And listen, this is a plug, comes to me. If you want some wonderful models, please read Moira's book. It's one of my most favorite things. And I have to say, The Happily Ever Older does talk about some of these great inspirational models, and to see that you're actually functioning out. Ambassador Ray, I want to capture you just before I know that you have to go. civil rights and civil society is an important voice, but sometimes we're not always sure how to do what is most effective at the global stage. You have been involved in the conversation around creating and enhancing the rights of older people, particularly at that global level. Do you have some advice for civil society about how to best mobilize and what is most effective?
I mean, the UN is made up of member states, so it's national governments that ultimately will make the decision as to whether or not we have a convention on the rights of older people. I think we're making progress here. More governments are coming on board. More governments like our own are saying, yes, we'll engage, we'll become part of the conversation. There's a general reluctance on the part of a lot of nation states to do more than they have to. And they know that a convention will create obligations, which has consequences, which is all the reason why we should do it. I mean, that's why we need it, is because there are needs that are going unmet, and there is a real challenge going forward. I think the key thing is for everybody to get active in their own country, for starters. And for those of us in wealthier societies to do whatever we can to assist those who are seeking to advocate for this very important cause in their own country and, in fact, around the world. I think that going back to the origins of the UN after the Second World War, civil society played a critical role in the formation of the UN. Civil society played a critical role in writing the charter and in adding words to the charter that would have more meaning and more impact. And this is the 71st anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And the Universal Declaration would not have happened without active civil society leadership and membership and pushing. And frankly, that's what's affected our own government in just looking at the situation, saying we better get involved in this. It's going to be a growing issue for all of us, and we need to respond to it. I think the other key thing is to, and Ovid talked about this, is the need for us to broaden our perspective and understand that everybody's coming from a particular place and circumstance. I think Canadians broadly have been listening to the perspective of Aboriginal leaders on our national stage for many years, and that has led to some change, not enough, but some. And I think it will lead to more because I think it's just a growing alliance that's being formed. And we really do have a lot of common ground. For example, the linkage between older people and the disabled movement. The disabled movement is large, it's articulate, and the needs of disabled people cross over many, many different groups and societies. We've just been celebrating this week the Convention on the Rights of the Disabled, and that's having an impact on our own work at the UN as we look at how we can move and make more progress. We've had a huge presence here, and it's made a big, big difference. So we need to keep working together, build alliances, build up the dialogue in different countries, and then begin to take the initiative to sign a draft convention, which will come forward and say, do you think your government should be signing this? Take it into every corner of the world, take it into every possible element where civil societies are active. And I think it will have an impact. I really do believe that that's how we get there. You need a certain number of countries to lead and to drive. And I've been pressing for our own government to be one of those countries. And I think we can make good progress on it. And I just think we have to keep focused on what we're trying to do and build up the support that's there. I think instinctively Canadians know that this is a big deal. We are, the aging of the Canadian population is a huge issue. The reason why the numbers are growing in terms of reports of abuse and so on is because the size of the population is growing, and governments are not investing enough in providing the services and the care that people need. And so this is a problem that's going to get worse before it gets better, simply because we haven't been doing enough. and the numbers are growing. So
And the numbers are growing. Exactly.
that's the reality. That's the reality.
It is the
And-
reality, and it's a reality for all of us. And I want to take a minute to thank each and every one of you for what you are doing on this reality, and thank everybody who's participated in our chat as well. We've got a number of different fantastic resources. I'm going to thank, on behalf of Margaret and I, each of our panelists today, and turn it over to Benedict. I think you want to do a few minutes of wrap up. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists.
Thanks to all of you for your answers today. And also thank you for all of you for keeping our chat box so active. It's been nearly impossible to keep up. So many comments, so many questions. We've had quite a few coming through. I don't know if we have any time for any question. Laura, what do you think?
I have been incorporating the questions as they come. So that was part of the discussion. Yeah,
I am glad. Thank you. So in that case, please all be aware, and we couldn't get to all of your questions. There were a lot, but you can always join us and also contact or connect with our panelists today. You can see their contact information on the screen right now. And just so you know, the slides will be made available along with the recording in the next couple of days. So if you've missed anything or you want to follow up with anyone, you can find those slides and you can contact everyone. You can also see here how to get in touch with Rayanne, myself, and your two moderators today, Laura and Margaret, if you want to hear more about their work or the campaign against ageism. We've also added on the screen and in the chat box the links to our respective websites. So this is where you can find more resources to learn about elder abuse, about ageism, to figure out what your services in your areas are, or to reach out to your, provincial organization and maybe join their efforts. You can also find us on social media. Today, of course, our Rights Do Not Get Old campaign is in full swing, so do join it. Hashtag Rights Do Not Get Old, hashtag WEAAD 2023. We'll be sharing a lot of information all day today. And a reminder that everything we talked about today, the need for including older adults in every steps of the way, what people can do at an individual or government or organizational level, all of that is something that we discuss in greater detail in Future Us, which is our strategy for elder abuse prevention. So if you want to learn more, futureus.cnpea.ca. And then finally, also a reminder, we're all charities and not-for-profits. And as you know, we're working in a field that is sorely overlooked and underfunded. So if you want to support our mission, you can also donate today. We're including the links on the screen, and your support is always so welcome and needed. And then finally, you can tell us more about what you thought about today. You can either scan the QR code on your screen right now, or the pop-up will happen when you close your Zoom window today. Again, a big thank you to all of you present today. A huge thank you to our interpreters for their skills and their time. And congratulations to Krista. I didn't get to say it out loud myself. We were so happy to have you all today. We hope that you will make the day count and that you will carry this enthusiasm into the rest of the year. Laura, back to you.
Thanks, everyone. Happy WEAAD. Happy recognizing the great work that you're all doing in the community. Give yourself a hand, and thank you again to our panelists. We'll see you next year. Don't forget to stay active all day today. And remember, don't forget to stay active all month long. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.